On March 12, 2008, in the serene town of Alexandria, Egypt, a tragic event unfolded, leading to a shocking crime. What started as a secret relationship between a Muslim woman and her husband's cousin spiraled into a murder that would leave the entire community stunned. The betrayal shattered close family bonds, forever altering the lives of those involved. Aisha had long been the embodiment of the devout Muslim wife that her community revered. Born in Cairo in 1975, she was raised in a strict household where faith and tradition were deeply ingrained in daily life. Her father, an Islamic scholar, instilled in her a profound respect for the values of her religion. Aisha envisioned a modest and fulfilling life centered around faith, love, and family. In 1998, she married Hassan, a man respected in the community for his strong moral character and business skills. At first, their union appeared ideal. For the first years, Aisha and Hassan's life was harmonious. Hassan provided for the family, and Aisha devoted herself to caring for their children and their home. Hassan's business was thriving, allowing them to move to a spacious apartment in Alexandria, a lifestyle that many admired. But as Hassan's career advanced, it demanded more of his time. He began traveling more frequently, and though he remained attentive when at home, these visits grew rare. By 2005, the strain in their relationship became harder for Aisha to ignore. Aisha found herself spending increasing amounts of time alone, filling her days with household tasks, raising their children, and upholding her religious duties. Despite her efforts, a sense of emptiness began to settle in her heart. Her once purposeful life now felt hollow, and she yearned for emotional closeness, a companionship that felt out of reach. During this period, Omar, Hassan's cousin, began visiting more often. Omar, known within the family for his wit and charm, was 35 years old in 2006. Just a few years older than Aisha, Omar had always been a familiar presence in their lives. He was the person everyone turned to for support, a man with a friendly smile and a light-hearted attitude. His own marriage, however, was struggling, something the family was aware of but rarely discussed. Initially, Omar's visits were simply part of family life. Holiday gatherings, dinners, and times when he helped Aisha with the children while Hassan was away. Omar had always been a trusted figure in her life, someone she could depend on. Over time, however, their interactions began to change. Almost unconsciously, Aisha found herself looking forward to his visits. His presence brought a warmth and comfort she hadn't felt in years. In early 2006, the shift became more apparent. Aisha started opening up to Omar about the growing distance in her marriage, while Omar shared his own marital troubles. Although they never intended for things to progress, the emotional connection between them deepened. Gradually, the boundaries began to blur. Despite the strict prohibitions in Islam against any physical involvement between a married woman and another man, particularly a relative of her husband, their mutual emotional support led them into dangerous territory. Initially, they pushed these boundaries subtly. Omar would stay a bit longer after dinner to help Aisha with the children, or their conversations would stretch into the evening under the pretext of family matters. This closeness provided them both with a much-needed sense of connection, and before long, they crossed a line that should never have been crossed. By mid-2006, Aisha and Omar had started meeting in secret. Though both felt guilty, their encounters brought them a solace they'd been missing in their marriages. Omar became more than just a relative. He became the emotional support Aisha had lost. He filled the emptiness left by Hassan's absence, and while Aisha felt torn, she clung to the comfort he offered. The weight of their shared burdens drew them closer in ways they could not have anticipated. Their secret weighed heavily on them both, but instead of weakening their bond, it only strengthened it. The affair was carefully concealed, with both Aisha and Omar meticulously guarding their actions to avoid any hint of suspicion. They lived in a delicate balance, hiding their forbidden connection while keeping up the facade of normalcy in their marriages. Aisha continued to appear as the devoted wife and mother, fulfilling her religious obligations and running the household with precision. But internally, she felt divided. She prayed for clarity, for guidance, yet found it impossible to resist the draw she felt toward Omar. By the end of 2007, their relationship had reached a critical point. Each encounter brought the risk of exposure, yet neither Aisha nor Omar could bring themselves to end it. They met in discreet locations, quiet parks, hidden corners of the city, or even in the late hours at home when the children were asleep and Hassan was away. As each month passed, the peril of discovery grew, yet their emotional bond only deepened. Aisha felt increasingly conflicted, caught between her faith, her responsibilities as a wife, and her intense feelings for Omar. She knew the affair was forbidden, and that discovery would bring devastating consequences. In her private moments, she reflected on the teachings she had been raised with, the importance of fidelity, the value of trust, and the serious repercussions of adultery in Islamic law. Still, she found herself unable to break free from Omar's influence. By early 2008, just a few months before everything would unravel, the strain of their secret relationship weighed on them more heavily than ever. The constant risk of exposure was exhausting, yet their connection remained unbreakable. Guilt gnawed at Aisha, but her isolation within her marriage to Hassan was overwhelming. Omar, too, struggled with the betrayal of his cousin, but could not tear himself away from the solace Aisha provided. Their lives became a fragile web of appearances, where one misstep could unravel everything. As the year began, the intensity of their bond transformed from emotional support to a dangerous obsession. Though deeply conscious of the values she had been raised with, Aisha found herself entangled in a relationship she could not escape. Each time she prayed, she asked for strength, for a way out, but found herself powerless to let go of Omar. Her feelings for Omar drew her deeper into the secret life they had created. In quiet moments alone, Aisha would contemplate the severe consequences of their choices. In her society, adultery was more than just a moral transgression. It carried severe punishments. She was haunted by the fear of being discovered, by the disgrace that would follow, and by the impact on her family. The possibility of facing judgment under Islamic law was a constant weight on her mind. She felt torn between her loyalty to Hassan, the man she had once loved, and her longing for Omar, who had filled the void of loneliness in her life. On February 6, 2008, while Hassan was away on one of his frequent business trips, Omar came to see Aisha again, using the pretext of helping her with household matters. They met in the late afternoon, knowing the risk they were taking. Aisha's home, a modest, beautiful apartment in a quiet neighborhood, provided them the privacy they sought. To others, Omar's presence had always seemed innocent. He was just a supportive cousin stepping in while Hassan was away. But on this day, something shifted. A neighbor, Fatima, happened to notice Aisha and Omar together, sensing a closeness that struck her as unusual. Although Fatima had often seen Omar visit, this time something seemed off. She kept her observations to herself at first, but soon shared them with others, and quiet whispers began circulating in the neighborhood. Rumors eventually reached Hassan's mother, who had been living with them. She, too, had noticed subtle changes in Aisha's behavior. Her once calm demeanor had grown anxious, her phone calls seemed more private, and her interactions with Omar carried a new tension. Hassan's mother, a perceptive woman with years of experience, began to feel uneasy. When Hassan returned from his trip in early March, his mother confided her suspicions, careful not to make accusations but urging him to be observant. She mentioned how Aisha seemed more distant and distracted, and how Omar's visits had become increasingly frequent. Although Hassan initially brushed off his mother's concerns, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. He resolved to keep a closer watch, unaware that events were about to escalate beyond his control. The night of March 12, 2008, marked a turning point. Omar, unable to stay away, visited Aisha once more, this time under cover of darkness. The streets were quiet, and Aisha's home, usually filled with the sounds of her children, was unusually silent. She had put the children to bed, and the house was still. Omar arrived just after 9 p.m., slipping inside as he had done many times before. They felt safe, assuming the night would pass without incident. But fate intervened. That evening, Hassan returned home unexpectedly, having cut his trip short to surprise his wife. As he entered, he heard muffled voices from the kitchen. Initially, he thought nothing of it, assuming Aisha was on the phone. But as he drew closer, he recognized Omar's voice. Suspicion gave way to fury, and he stormed toward the kitchen, ready to confront the truth that would change everything. When Hassan walked into the room, the sight before him confirmed his worst fears. Aisha and Omar stood too close, their interaction too intimate. In that instant, everything unraveled. Overcome with anger and betrayal, Hassan confronted them, his voice trembling with fury. He accused Omar of the ultimate betrayal, of violating family trust, of dishonoring him and his marriage. Omar, caught off guard, attempted to calm Hassan, but the situation had already spiraled beyond control. The argument intensified, with heated words exchanged. Aisha stood frozen, unable to speak, as the two men shouted. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and comfort, now echoed with the weight of their shattered lives. Tension filled the room until, in a moment of blind rage, Omar, panicked and desperate, grabbed a knife from the counter. In the chaos, he lashed out, stabbing Hassan repeatedly. Aisha could only watch in horror as her husband fell to the floor, blood pooling around him. The sound of the knife clattering to the tile was haunting, marking the end of the life she had known. The man she had built a life with, the father of her children, lay dying before her, and she was powerless to stop it. Realizing the gravity of what he had done, Omar fled without a word, leaving Aisha alone with the tragic consequences. The home, once filled with love, was now eerily silent, save for the fading sounds of Hassan's labored breaths as they slowed, then ceased. At 11:35 p.m., Aisha, panicked and trembling, called the police. Her voice shook as she claimed that her husband had been attacked by an intruder. A lie, an attempt to cover the truth. But even as she uttered the words, she knew the story would soon unravel. When authorities arrived, they found her sitting beside Hassan's body, her hands stained with his blood. The scene was chaotic, shattered dishes, blood smeared across the floor, and the knife still lying where Omar had dropped it. The investigators sensed that something was amiss and began questioning Aisha immediately. Her story, though carefully crafted, was riddled with inconsistencies. As they pieced together the evidence, it became clear that this was no random attack. The truth about what had happened that night would soon come to light, exposing everything Aisha and Omar had tried so hard to keep hidden. Following the initial chaos of that night on March 12, 2008, the investigation into Hassan's murder began in earnest. From the moment police arrived, something felt off. The crime scene was brutal, blood spattered across the kitchen, shattered dishes strewn on the floor, and Hassan's lifeless body at the center of it all. Aisha, sitting nearby, tried to explain, but her account didn't align with the evidence before them. The scene didn't support her version of events. The detectives quickly realized they were dealing with a far more complex case than a simple home invasion. On March 6th, the lead investigators re-examined the details of Aisha's story. As they scrutinized the crime scene, they noticed several details that didn't add up. The position of Hassan's body indicated he'd been attacked at close range, not by an intruder who had forced their way into the house, as Aisha had claimed. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows or doors, nothing to suggest someone had entered by force. The knife used in the murder, still lying on the kitchen floor, also didn't match Aisha's account. As the investigation continued, the detectives turned their attention to neighbors and family members, piecing together every possible clue. Fatima, a neighbor, recalled seeing Omar visit Aisha's house frequently in recent months, noting an unusual closeness between the two. While she'd dismissed it at the time, her observations took on a darker tone in the wake of the murder. By March 8th, the case took a serious turn. Omar was brought in for questioning, having kept his distance from the family since the incident. During the interview, his nervous demeanor, shaky hands, and the small cut on his hand raised suspicions. When questioned about his whereabouts on the night of Hassan's murder, Omar claimed he was far from Aisha's house. But under pressure, his story began to falter, inconsistencies emerging with every answer. His alibi was weak, and when asked for specifics, he struggled to provide them. Detectives felt they were closing in, but they needed concrete evidence to directly link him to the crime. The following days intensified the investigation, Forensic teams thoroughly examined the crime scene, analyzing blood patterns in the kitchen and inspecting the knife, still stained with Hassan's blood. Soon, fingerprint analysis revealed Omar's prints on the knife, confirming that this was not a random act of violence, but a calculated personal attack. On March 20th, another critical discovery emerged: bloodstains in Omar's car. Forensic tests confirmed it was Hassan's blood, placing Omar at the scene. This final piece of evidence was all the detectives needed to secure a warrant for Omar's arrest. That same evening, he was taken into custody. The realization of his actions appeared to dawn on him as he was handcuffed and led to the police car. The betrayal was now public, and there was no escaping the consequences. Omar, the trusted cousin and once beloved friend, was now labeled a murderer. The investigation extended to Aisha, who was arrested as an accomplice. Although she hadn't committed the murder herself, her lie about an intruder and her emotional involvement with Omar in the lead-up to the tragedy implicated her. The secret affair, long hidden, was now exposed, and the repercussions rippled through the community. Shocked by the revelation, friends and family distanced themselves, struggling to process the scandal. Aisha's family, once respected, was now shrouded in shame. Hassan's family, devastated by his violent death, could barely speak of their loss. Their son, who had worked tirelessly for his family's well-being, was gone. And the woman they'd once welcomed as their daughter-in-law was at the center of it all. For both Omar and Aisha, their arrest marked the end of the lives they once knew. What began as a forbidden connection had ended in tragedy. The bond that once seemed so powerful had become their undoing. The affair, initially a source of solace, had now left destruction in its wake. The trial began on May 14, 2008. In the courtroom, Aisha and Omar's affair was laid bare, and the prosecution detailed the events leading up to the murder. The case carried an intense emotional and cultural weight, especially given the strict rules against adultery. The community was captivated, and the scandalous details became the talk of the town. During the trial, Omar admitted to the murder, claiming it was an act of passion. The weight of their actions was undeniable, and the consequences inescapable. Aisha and Omar had not only destroyed their own lives, but deeply wounded those around them. The affair, once their escape, had ultimately become their downfall. During the trial, Aisha pleaded for mercy, claiming she had been manipulated and never intended for things to escalate to violence. However, the evidence linking her as an accomplice was indisputable. On August 20, 2008, Omar received a life sentence for murder. Aisha, spared the death penalty under Islamic law, was sentenced to 20 years for her role in covering up the crime and her involvement in the affair. The community was left in shock by the betrayal. The tale of a forbidden love turned tragic served as a stark reminder of how desire and deceit could devastate lives and families. The once close-knit family was now fractured beyond repair. Aisha's children were left without both parents, and Omar's family disowned him, severing ties to the man they once held dear. The entire community grappled with the emotional aftermath of a tragedy that had erupted from a hidden relationship. The murder cast a dark shadow over everyone involved, leaving a lasting scar that would haunt them for years. This story was more than a tale of betrayal. It was a tragic lesson on the destructive consequences when trust and loyalty are broken. What began as a secret affair spiraled into a tragic crime that shattered lives, forever altering the fate of those involved. For more tragic cases and insights, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our stories of twisted betrayal and shocking real-life events.